10-year-old Lily sits by her father's grave, tears staining her face. Her mother Clara coldly turns away without a word of comfort. Lily pleads, "Mom, don't leave me," but receives only silence. The villagers view her as just a delusional child. Her old photograph, blurred with tears, is all she has left of her father. The door slams behind her as she kneels, clutching the picture. Just then, a man appears, steps forward and places his hand on her shoulder, saying gently, "From now on, you're with me. Can Lily escape this pain?" Comment below if you believe in miracles. On a damp autumn afternoon, in the small town of Harrington, 10-year-old Lily Collins sat alone by her father's grave. The wind howled through the trees, but she barely noticed. Her small hands, pale and trembling, gripped an old, faded photograph. The image was of her father smiling, holding her close during their last family vacation. It had been 2 months since his sudden death, and still Lily couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't really gone. Her mother Clara had not been able to understand her, nor could anyone else in town. They all thought Lily was delusional, a child trying to hold on to something that wasn't there. But Lily knew better. She heard his voice, faint, soft, but there deep within her mind. His words wrapped around her like a blanket, soothing her in the dark moments when everything else felt cold and empty. "I'm still with you, Lily," he'd whisper. "You're never alone." But the others didn't understand. They just whispered behind her back, pitying the little girl who had lost so much. Her mother, too, had begun to grow distant, telling Lily to stop with the silly fantasies. Clara, worn and broken from the weight of her grief, was a shadow of the woman she used to be. Lily had learned not to complain when her mother turned away from her, too consumed by her own sorrow to see the pain of her child. It was late in the afternoon when a man, tall and broad-shouldered, approached the cemetery gates. Daniel Wells, a millionaire businessman in his mid-40s, was well known in the town, but he had never been to this side of Harrington before. He had a reputation for being detached, focused solely on his empire. But something about Lily sitting there, so small and fragile, drew him in. It wasn't just her appearance, though. It was the way she held herself, a quiet strength that spoke to something deep within him. His life had been spent in boardrooms, managing numbers and people, but there, standing by the grave, he felt something stir in his heart. The day before, Daniel had heard whispers about the little girl who talked to her father's grave, and despite his usual indifference to such tales, he couldn't ignore the curiosity building within him. As he walked closer, he could hear Lily's soft murmurs. He stopped just beyond her reach, weighting his heart suddenly heavy. "Hello?" Daniel called softly. Lily looked up, startled. Her tear-streaked face quickly turned toward him, eyes wide and wet, but there was no fear in her gaze, only quiet longing. "Why are you sitting here alone, sweetie?" Daniel asked, his voice gentle, though he didn't know why he felt such a pull to speak to her. Lily wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat, the cold breeze biting at her skin. "I'm not alone," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "My dad is here. He talks to me." Daniel froze for a moment, unsure if he should say anything more. He had seen his share of broken families, but this felt different. Something in the girl's eyes, something that was raw and genuine, sent a shiver down his spine. "I'm sure he's with you in spirit, sweetheart," Daniel said, crouching down to her level. "But you're here by yourself now. Is your mom nearby?" Lily nodded her hand, clutching the photo tighter. "My mom doesn't understand," she murmured, her voice faltering as she looked down at the ground, her small body trembling slightly. "She says I should stop talking about him, but I know he's still here. I know it." For a moment, Daniel simply looked at her, his heart aching at the sadness in her eyes. He had seen many children over the years, but none quite like this. His mind began to drift, pulling him back to a time when he was a child, alone, with no one to speak to, just like Lily. He had lost his own father at a young age, and the emptiness he had felt back then flooded him now sharper than ever. But then Daniel noticed something, a small, cold device tucked into the corner of Lily's coat pocket. He glanced at it, then back at her. She had never mentioned it, but there was something about the way she clung to the photograph and the letter in her hand. It didn't feel like a child's game. There was no fantasy in her eyes. Something told him that Lily wasn't just playing pretend. There was something more. "Lily, do you mind if I sit with you for a while?" He asked, his voice softer now. She nodded quietly, shifting aside to make room for him on the cold stone bench near the grave. As Daniel sat beside her, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, as though this child needed someone to believe her, and maybe someone who could uncover the truth about what she was holding on to so desperately. And that's when it all started. The strange feeling he couldn't shake, the sense that there was something buried beneath the grave that needed to be uncovered. But what? The following morning, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Lily. His usual routine of meetings and business calls felt distant and unimportant compared to the image of that little girl sitting by her father's grave. The more he thought about her, the more he felt compelled to do something to help in some way. But what could he do for a child whose grief seemed so tangled with something deeper, something that went beyond mere loss? That afternoon, after another round of meetings, Daniel decided to visit the cemetery again. His feet carried him there almost by instinct, each step feeling heavier than the last. The cemetery looked different in the daylight, quieter, more peaceful, but still laden with a sense of loss. He walked through the rows of headstones until he saw her again, sitting in the same spot, her back hunched against the cold, her legs tucked underneath her small frame. She looked up as he approached her face, breaking into a faint smile when she saw him. The photograph she had been holding the previous day was gone, replaced by a small, worn notebook in her hands. She had scribbled in it her small handwriting barely legible. Lily, Daniel said gently, kneeling in front of her, "I wanted to check on you. How are you feeling today?" She stared at him for a long moment, her large, deep eyes scanning his face as though trying to decide whether or not she could trust him. And then, as though deciding that he wasn't going to judge her, she spoke in a soft, measured voice. "I don't know why people don't believe me. My dad is still here, Mr. Wells. He talks to me. Every day." Daniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He couldn't understand it fully, but he knew Lily wasn't lying. There was something about her, something in her conviction that made him believe her. This wasn't a child's imagination at play. This was something far more intense, more real. "Lily," he said slowly, his voice low. "Do you mind if I ask you something?" She nodded without hesitation. "Could you tell me more about the voice you hear? How do you know it's your father?" Lily hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground, as if she were gathering her thoughts. Then, in a voice filled with both wonder and sadness, she spoke. "When my dad was alive, he always promised me that if anything happened to him, he'd find a way to stay with me. I didn't know what he meant, but he told me that he would never leave me alone. He said I would hear his voice when I needed him most." Daniel's heart clenched. He could see how much Lily longed for that connection, how desperately she needed to hold on to something, anything that reminded her of her father. It wasn't just grief that had brought her here every day. It was love, a deep, unshakable bond that no one could take away. Daniel's thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of footsteps. He turned to see a figure walking toward them from the main path, a man in a dark suit, his face serious and stern. Lily's eyes widened at the sight of him, and she immediately stood up, clutching her notebook to her chest. "Lily," the man called, his voice sharp. "What are you doing here again? I told you no more coming to this grave. It's time to go home." Daniel stood up, his protective instincts kicking in as he moved to place himself between Lily and the approaching man. The man stopped a few feet away, glaring at Daniel, as if sizing him up. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, his tone polite but firm. "Who are you?" "I'm her uncle," the man snapped. "And you're the rich businessman who's been talking to my niece. Stay away from her. She doesn't need people like you in her life." Daniel didn't flinch. He had dealt with all kinds of people in his life, but something about the man's dismissive attitude toward Lily bothered him deeply. There was something not right about the way he spoke to her, the way he treated her, as if she were a burden. "I'm not here to cause any trouble." Daniel said, his voice calm, but his eyes hard. "But I don't think you have the right to tell her where she can or can't go. Lily is grieving. She needs space." The man scoffed, his face darkening. "You don't know anything about grief, trust me. And you certainly don't know anything about this family. She's a burden. I've got my hands full with her. She's got no place here." Lily flinched at her uncle's words, her small body shrinking in on itself, as if his words had struck her like a physical blow. Her eyes watered, but she quickly wiped the tears away, as though afraid to show weakness in front of the two men. Daniel felt a sudden surge of anger. He turned to face the man fully, his voice dropping to a low, controlled growl. "I don't know what your history is with Lily, but I can tell you one thing: she's not a burden. She's a child who's lost everything, and the last thing she needs is to be treated like this." The man sneered, his gaze cold and dismissive. "I'm the one who's been taking care of her, not you." Before Daniel could respond, Lily stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to go home," she said softly. "I just want to stay here. I want to hear my dad's voice again." The uncle looked at her, his expression hardening. "You heard me, Lily. We're going now." Lily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. She turned and ran, disappearing into the trees behind the cemetery. Daniel stood still for a moment, watching her, his chest tight with a mixture of anger and sympathy. There was no mistaking it now. Lily's family, her own blood, had failed her, and it seemed like no one was going to stand up for her except him. Without a word, Daniel turned and followed her, determined to make sure she was safe. Daniel's footsteps echoed in the cemetery as he followed the path that Lily had taken. His mind was a whirlwind, a storm of emotions and thoughts he couldn't quite make sense of. Why was her uncle so cold, so detached? Why was Lily's pain met with such cruelty, as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience? His heart ached for the little girl, for her quiet strength that masked a world of hurt too big for her small frame to carry. The trees loomed large ahead, their branches swaying ominously in the evening breeze. As Daniel reached the edge of the cemetery, he spotted Lily crouching beside an old, dilapidated wooden fence, her body curled inward like a fragile shell. Her face was hidden in her hands, her shoulders trembling. She had stopped running. The weight of her sorrow had caught up to her, and now she sat utterly still, as if trying to become invisible. "Lily," Daniel called softly, his voice gentle but filled with concern. "Hey, it's okay. You don't have to run away." She flinched at the sound of his voice, but when she looked up, her eyes were empty, hollow, as though they had seen too much for one so young. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel knelt beside her, trying to find the right words, but everything felt too inadequate. All he could offer was his presence. "Why do they hate me?" Lily whispered, her voice breaking as she spoke the words she had been holding in for so long. "Why does my uncle treat me like I don't matter? I'm not a burden. I just want to hear him, to know that he's still with me." Daniel's heart shattered at her words. He wanted to tell her that her uncle was wrong, that she was worthy of love, that she mattered more than anything else. But instead, All he could do was sit beside her, feeling the coldness of the night begin to seep into his bones. He didn't know what to say, but he knew he couldn't leave her here alone. "You matter," Daniel said softly, his voice steady, but heavy with emotion. "You matter more than anyone else right now. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't." Lily's lips trembled as she looked at him, her gaze searching for something. Something solid. Something real. But what if he's gone for good? What if I'm just holding on to something that doesn't exist? What if my dad's voice is just in my head? Daniel didn't have an answer for her. He couldn't lie to her, not when she was asking the most heartbreaking question a child could ask. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her the warmth of his touch. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice thick with the weight of her pain. "But what I do know is that your father loved you. And if he made you that promise, I believe he meant it. I believe he's still here in some way with you." Lily closed her eyes, clutching the notebook tighter to her chest, as if holding on to the last thread of hope that connected her to her father. Her small body shook with sobs, the kind of sobs that echoed with all the loneliness, all the abandonment she had carried for so long. The emptiness of her heart was too much for her to bear, and Daniel could only watch as her grief poured out in waves, the sound of her pain too raw for him to ignore. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice muffled by her tears. "I don't know how to stop feeling like this." Daniel's chest tightened. He had lived a life of control, of order, of logic. He had built his wealth through ruthless precision, but now standing beside this little girl, he realized that no amount of success could fill the void of what she had lost. What she needed was not logic. It was love. It was someone to stand beside her, someone who wouldn't leave when things got hard. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Daniel said softly, his voice calm, despite the turmoil inside. "We'll figure it out together. I'll help you, Lily, I promise." Her eyes flickered up at him, her tear-streaked face trembling, searching for sincerity in his words. For a moment it seemed like she wasn't sure whether to trust him or not. But then slowly she nodded her small hand, reaching out to take his. It was a tentative gesture, but it was a gesture of trust nonetheless. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel smiled, though his heart was heavy. He didn't know what the future held for them, but in that moment all he could do was offer her the promise of safety, the promise that no matter how dark the road ahead seemed, he wouldn't leave her alone to walk it. The sound of footsteps interrupted their fragile peace. Daniel turned to see Lily's uncle approaching once more, his face stern, his posture rigid. "Lily, I said it's time to go," he said coldly, ignoring Daniel entirely. His gaze was fixed on his niece, his expression one of impatience and contempt. "You're not allowed to stay out here. Let's go." Lily flinched at his voice, shrinking away from him, her hand tightening around Daniel's. "Lily, you don't have to go with him," Daniel said firmly, standing up. His protective instincts flared once more, his chest swelling with anger at the thought of this man taking her away from him again. Her uncle sneered, his eyes narrowing. "This is none of your business, Wells. Stay out of it." But Daniel didn't back down. He stood tall, positioning himself between Lily and the man, his voice steady but fierce. "It is my business. I won't let you treat her like this." The uncle took a step forward, his face turning red with anger. "Stay out of this or I'll call the police. You have no right to interfere." Daniel didn't move, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't going to back down. Not this time. Lily, still clutching the notebook to her chest, turned to look at her uncle, her eyes filled with determination. She had made her decision. "I'm not going with you," she said quietly, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm staying here. The silence that followed Lily's words was thick, charged with tension. For a moment, no one moved. Her uncle stood frozen, staring at her, as if she had just committed the ultimate betrayal. His lips curled into a snarl, but there was a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He wasn't used to being defied, especially not by a child. "You little," he began, his voice sharp with rising fury, but Lily stood her ground, her small body trembling with fear, yet resolute. She had made her choice. Her father's voice still lingered in her mind, urging her to be brave. She wasn't going to let her uncle drag her back to that suffocating house, to the cold, neglectful place that had become her prison. The memories of her mother's apathy and her uncle's harsh words were all she had left, and they weren't enough to stop her now. Not when she felt a spark of hope flicker inside her, not when Daniel had shown her a kindness no one else had ever offered. Her uncle took a menacing step forward, his face twisted with anger. "You're going to regret this, Lily. You think you're safe here, but you're not. I'll make sure you get what you deserve." Lily flinched at his words, but she didn't back down. Her breath was shaky, but her resolve remained unwavering. She had no illusions about her uncle's cruelty, but for the first time in a long time she felt a flicker of something more powerful than fear-defiance. Daniel could feel the tension thickening in the air, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He didn't care about the threat. He didn't care about the man who stood before him, blocking the way to Lily's safety. What mattered was Lily, the fragile little girl who had chosen to stand up for herself, to reject the suffocating grip of her family. "Stay away from her," Daniel said, his voice low but steady, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "She's not going anywhere with you." Her uncle sneered, but there was something in Daniel's eyes, something firm, something unyielding that made him hesitate. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Daniel, whose wealth and influence were enough to make people back down. But there was no doubt now. Lily had chosen, and Daniel wasn't going to let her fall back into the darkness. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over, huh?" Her uncle spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can replace me?" Daniel's heart tightened. He knew this wasn't just about Lily. It was about control, about power, and her uncle's inability to let go of the hold he had on her. He had treated Lily as if she were a tool to be used, not a child to be cared for. His cruelty wasn't just a product of grief, it was a deep-seated bitterness, a toxic need to feel important, to feel in control. "I'm not here to replace anyone," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to make sure she's safe. You've failed her, and I won't let you hurt her anymore." For a long moment her uncle just stood there, his eyes burning with fury. But in the end, something in him seemed to snap. With a frustrated grunt, he turned away and stormed off, his footsteps echoing across the ground as he retreated back toward the town. The weight of his presence lingered, but Lily was free of him, at least for now. Daniel stood there for a moment longer, watching her uncle disappear into the distance. The adrenaline still coursing through his veins. But now there was a sense of relief, a small victory for Lily. He turned back to her, his eyes softening when he saw the small, trembling figure standing before him. "You're safe now?" Daniel said, kneeling down so he was eye level with her. His voice was gentle, a quiet reassurance in the midst of the storm. "I won't let him hurt you anymore. I promise." Lily nodded, her eyes wide, the exhaustion of the past few days catching up with her. The fight had drained her, but now there was something else in her gaze, a faint glimmer of hope. It was fragile, but it was there. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to breathe, to believe that things could be different. Daniel extended his hand to her. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Lily hesitated for a brief moment, but then with a soft smile, she reached out and took his hand. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Together they walked toward the small car Daniel had parked at the edge of the cemetery. The weight of the past few months, the grief, the loneliness, the constant battle for survival hung heavy in the air. But for the first time in a long time, Lily didn't feel so alone. As they reached the car, Daniel opened the door for her, and Lily climbed in, her eyes still fixed on the cemetery behind her. There was a sense of finality in leaving it behind, but also a sense of freedom, like she was finally stepping into a world where she could belong. "I'm here for you," Lily Daniel said, his voice steady, comforting. "You don't have to face this alone anymore." The car doors closed with a soft click, and they drove off, leaving the cemetery behind. The town of Harrington, with all its secrets and its shadows, faded into the distance. But for Lily, the road ahead was no longer as dark as it had been. There was someone who cared, someone who believed in her. And that, in the end, was enough. The drive back to Daniel's estate felt like a long journey, even though it only took 20 minutes. The car's engine hummed steadily, the silence between them stretching long, but neither of them felt the need to speak. Lily was curled in the passenger seat, her small hands clenched around the notebook she had clutched earlier, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The light from the street lamps outside flickered in her gaze, but it didn't seem to reach her heart. Her mind was elsewhere, probably still lost in the world of her grief. Daniel glanced over at her from time to time, but he didn't press her to talk. He knew better than to push. Children, especially those who had suffered as much as Lily had, didn't always have the words for their pain. Sometimes it was enough just to be present. But even in the quiet, Daniel could feel the weight of their situation settling in. He had promised Lily she would be safe, that no one would hurt her again. But the reality of keeping that promise felt heavier than he had anticipated. The truth was, Lily had no one else. Her mother Clara was too far gone in her own sorrow, and her uncle, well, Daniel had seen enough to know that he wasn't going to be a reliable source of protection. The worst part, Daniel didn't know how much he could help. His wealth and influence couldn't undo the years of neglect and emotional abuse Lily had endured. They couldn't replace the father she had lost, the family that had failed her. What he could offer her was a chance to rebuild her life, to find a new sense of safety and belonging. But that wasn't going to be easy. There were battles ahead, ones he wasn't sure he was prepared to fight. The car pulled into the driveway of his estate, a sprawling mansion perched on a hill overlooking the town below. It was beautiful, but tonight it felt cold. Lily had never been here before, and as she stepped out of the car and gazed at the large, imposing house, she didn't seem impressed. In fact, she seemed more uncertain than anything else, her small frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the place. It was a world she didn't belong to, a world so far removed from the dirt and pain of her own life that it might as well have been a different universe. "Come on inside," Daniel said, his voice gentle, as he motioned for her to follow him. "It's not much, but it's a safe place." Lily hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the house, then back to Daniel. She took a deep breath, then followed him inside. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft click of the door closing behind them. Daniel led her into the living room, a spacious area filled with warm lighting and plush furniture. The large windows offered a stunning view of the valley below, but Lily didn't seem to notice. She sat down on one of the chairs, her hands still clutching the notebook, as if it were a lifeline. Daniel took a seat opposite her, his gaze studying her quietly. He wanted to say something to ease her, but he didn't know what. He had never been good with words, especially not when it came to matters of the heart. But he knew that she needed more than just a place to stay. She needed a family. She needed to know that someone would fight for her. Someone would protect her no matter what. "You can stay here for as long as you need to," Daniel said, breaking the silence at last. "I'll take care of you, Lily. I won't let anyone hurt you." Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and hope. For a moment, Daniel saw the same look in her eyes that he had seen in his own reflection years ago, when he had been a child, abandoned and alone. He had long since buried those memories, convinced himself that wealth and power had erased the pain. But they hadn't, and now, seeing Lily, he realized that he couldn't outrun his past any more than she could. "I don't need much," Lily said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Just the voice. I just need to hear it. My dad's voice." Daniel's heart clenched. He could understand the desperation in her words, the need to hold on to something that made sense in a world that had betrayed her. He nodded slowly. "I'll help you, Lily," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I promise you won't lose him again." Lily's eyes softened just a little as she looked at him. There was still so much pain in her gaze, so many layers of hurt and abandonment. But for the first time since they had met, there was something else there too. Trust. A small fragile seed of trust that Daniel knew he had to nurture, protect, and prove worthy of. As they sat in silence, the weight of the moment hung in the air between them. Daniel didn't know how he was going to help Lily, or what the future held for them both. But one thing was certain: he couldn't let her go back to the life she had come from. No matter what it took, he would do whatever it took to help her heal, because in that moment he realized that by helping her, he might just be able to help himself too. The days that followed passed in a quiet blur, each one marked by a fragile sense of routine. Lily, though still hesitant and distant, seemed to slowly relax within the walls of Daniel's home. Her initial wariness of the mansion began to fade, replaced by an almost cautious curiosity. She wandered the vast hallways, her small steps echoing against the cold marble floors, occasionally pausing to gaze out the large windows, her eyes following the movement of the trees swaying in the wind. But she never strayed far from her father's notebook, her lifeline. It was as if it was the only piece of her world that hadn't been shattered, a connection to him, the one constant in a life that had crumbled around her. At night, when the house was quiet and the shadows grew long, she would retreat to her room, curl up under the thick blankets and hold the notebook close, whispering her father's name as though calling him back to her. Daniel watched this from a distance, careful not to intrude. He wanted to help her, but he knew she had to take the first step. She needed to mourn, to grieve in her own time, in her own way. He couldn't rush it, no matter how much he wanted to reach out and offer her comfort. But something about the stillness in her eyes, the deep sorrow that lingered behind her quiet facade, made him feel like he was failing her. That night after dinner, Daniel decided to check on her. He knocked gently on her bedroom door, not wanting to startle her. "Lily," he called softly. "Can I come in?" There was a long pause before she finally responded, her voice thin, almost brittle. "Yeah, it's okay." He opened the door, slowly stepping into the dimly lit room. Lily sat on the edge of her bed, her gaze fixed on the window, her father's notebook resting on her lap. She didn't look up when he entered, but she didn't push him away either. There was an odd kind of silence between them, one that held both comfort and sadness. Daniel stood at the door for a moment, unsure of what to say. He didn't want to intrude on her grief, but he also knew that she needed something. She needed someone who could help her bridge the gap between the past and the future, someone who could help her heal without forcing her to forget. He took a slow step forward, then another, until he was standing by her side. "Lily," he began quietly, "I know you're holding on to a lot right now. I can see it in your eyes. But I want you to know that you don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to fight through this by yourself." She glanced up at him briefly, her eyes dull with exhaustion. But there was something else there too. Something that made Daniel hold his breath. A flicker of hope. Just the smallest spark of trust. "I know it feels like your dad is all you have left." Daniel continued, his voice soft but steady. "But I'm here for you, Lily. I won't leave. You don't have to keep this burden all to yourself." Lily's gaze dropped to the notebook in her hands, her fingers tracing the edges as if it were a sacred object. She swallowed hard, as if struggling with the weight of his words. "But he's gone," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "He's really gone. And I don't know how to live without him. I don't know how to move on." Daniel's heart tightened. He crouched down in front of her, bringing himself to her level. "It's okay to feel lost, Lily. It's okay to not have all the answers right now. I know it's hard, but you have to believe that even though he's gone, you don't have to be alone. He's always going to be a part of you. You'll carry him with you just like the rest of us carry the people we love inside of us. But that doesn't mean you can't live too. It doesn't mean you have to keep suffering in silence." Lily's eyes welled up with tears, her lips trembling as she fought to keep them in check. The dam that had been holding back her grief cracked, and in a flood of emotion she finally allowed herself to feel it all. The loss, the confusion, the anger, the fear, everything that had been building inside her for months. "I don't want to forget him," she sobbed, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to forget my dad. I can't. I just can't." Daniel's heart broke at the sound of her crying. He moved closer, wrapping his arms around her in a tentative embrace. She stiffened at first, but after a moment she relaxed into the comfort he offered, her small body shaking with each sob. He held her close, letting her cry without judgment, without trying to fix anything. This was her pain, her grief, and he wouldn't rush her through it. For what felt like an eternity, they stayed there with only the sound of Lily's soft sobs filling the room. The weight of her loss hung heavily in the air, but in that moment, Daniel realized something. He wasn't just here for Lily. He was here for himself, too. He had spent years building walls around his own heart, hiding from the pain of his past, pretending that wealth and success could fill the emptiness he had carried for so long. But watching Lily, seeing the raw, unfiltered grief in her eyes, made him realize that he had never truly allowed himself to heal. He had never allowed himself to face the truth of what he had lost. As Lily's sobs began to slow, Daniel spoke softly. "It's okay to cry, Lily. It's okay to feel everything. But I want you to know you don't have to carry it forever. You can let it go when you're ready. I'm not going anywhere. And I'll be here to help you through it no matter what." Lily's head rested on his shoulder, her breathing still uneven, but the tears had stopped. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. She was beginning to understand, to feel the truth in Daniel's words. Maybe she didn't have to carry the weight of her grief alone anymore. The days after that night were quieter. Lily seemed lighter, as though the emotional weight she had been carrying had been eased just a little. She still spent hours in her room, writing in her father's notebook, the pages filled with thoughts, memories, and unanswered questions. But there was something different in her now. She had begun to let Daniel in just a little at a time. Daniel, for his part, kept his distance. He knew that healing took time, and while he could offer comfort, he couldn't force her to move forward. He could only show up every day and be there when she was ready. But he also knew that there was a deeper battle brewing, one that neither he nor Lily could escape. The storm wasn't over. It was only just beginning. One afternoon, as Daniel was going over some work in his study, the doorbell rang. He didn't expect any visitors. His life had become more isolated since Lily had arrived. He glanced at the clock. It was just after 4. He stood up, walking to the front door, with a slight sense of unease. When he opened the door, the last person he expected to see stood there, Clara Lily's mother. She looked older than he remembered her face, gaunt and tired, her eyes hollow, with a sorrow that seemed to have consumed her entirely. But even in her frailty, there was an edge to her demeanor, something that told Daniel that her visit wasn't just to check on Lily. "Clara," Daniel said, surprised by the tightness in his chest. "What are you doing here?" She didn't meet his gaze immediately. Instead, her eyes flickered to the side, scanning the house behind him. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but edged with something brittle. "I came to see my daughter. I'm her mother, Daniel." He studied her for a moment, his mind racing. This wasn't just a simple visit. Clara hadn't made any attempt to see Lily since the funeral. She hadn't made any effort to reach out at all, and now, after weeks of silence, she was standing at his doorstep demanding to see her daughter. "I think Lily's doing better here," Daniel said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "She's safe. And that's what matters right now." Clara's eyes narrowed, and for a moment a flash of something darker crossed her face. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't about what's best for her. This is about what's rightfully mine. I'm still her mother, Daniel." Daniel's stomach turned. He had known this moment was coming, the day Lily's mother would show up, wanting to reclaim control over her daughter, wanting to assert her authority. He didn't know why she hadn't been involved in Lily's life after the death of her father, but it was clear now that Clara hadn't been thinking about Lily's well-being. She had been consumed by her own grief, and now she was angry that someone else was stepping in to fill the role of protector. "This isn't about ownership," Daniel said, his voice cool. "It's about Lily's safety. It's about her healing." Clara stepped forward, her gaze hardening. "And who are you to decide that for her? You've barely known her. You don't know what she needs, Daniel." Daniel's jaw clenched. He could feel the tension rising, a mix of frustration and protectiveness threatening to spill over. He wasn't going to let Clara tear down the small progress Lily had made. She had no right to barge in and act as if everything could return to normal, as if the neglect, the emotional abuse, and the years of silence meant nothing. "I know more than you think." Daniel set his tone low but firm. "I know that Lily deserves better than what you've been giving her. I know that she's a child who needs love, not control. And I know that you haven't been there for her, not when it mattered." Clara's face twisted in anger, her lips curling into a sneer. "You think you can replace me? You think you can just waltz in and play the hero? Well, I'm still her mother, and I want her back. You have no right to keep her from me." Daniel took a deep breath, willing himself to remain calm. "Clara, if you want to be a mother to her, you need to prove it. You need to show her that you care, that you're ready to be there for her, not just when it's convenient, but when it counts." Clara's eyes flickered with something close to fear. She wasn't used to being challenged, not in this way. For a brief moment, Daniel saw the cracks in her armor, the desperation that lay beneath the anger. "Lily is mine," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She's my only connection to him. I've lost everything, Daniel." Do you understand that Daniel's heart softened, but only slightly? "I understand grief," he said quietly. "But you don't get to hurt her in the process." "I won't let you." Clara stood still for a moment, as if considering his words, but then with a sharp exhale, she turned and walked away, her figure retreating down the path. Daniel watched her go, his chest tight with a mixture of relief and sorrow. He didn't know if she would ever truly understand. But one thing was clear: he would fight for Lily no matter what. Inside, he found Lily standing at the window, watching the scene unfold from a distance. She didn't say anything at first, but her eyes met his, and in them Daniel saw the same uncertainty, the same questions that had been haunting her for so long. "Who was that?" Lily asked, her voice small. Daniel paused, then walked over to her, crouching down beside her. "That was your mom. She wanted to see you." Lily's expression remained unreadable. "What did she want?" "She wants you back," Lily, Daniel said softly, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "But you don't have to go anywhere if you don't want to. You're safe here with me." Lily nodded, her gaze distant. "I don't know if I can trust her anymore." "You don't have to figure everything out right now," Daniel reassured her. "Take your time. I'll be here no matter what." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time Lily allowed herself to believe them. The days after Clara's visit were quieter, but the storm that had been brewing between Lily, her mother, and Daniel was far from over. Lily seemed to withdraw further into herself, her gaze distant, as if she were trying to process the emotions that had flooded her in the wake of her mother's sudden reappearance. Daniel understood the turmoil she was going through. The bond between a mother and child was a powerful one, and even though Clara had been distant, even neglectful, Lily still clung to the hope that she might change, that things might go back to how they once were. But Daniel knew better. He had seen the cracks in Clara's facade, seen the deep selfishness that had led her to abandon her daughter when she needed her most. Lily had suffered for far too long under the weight of that neglect, and now Daniel couldn't and wouldn't let her return to that life. Each day, Lily's resolve grew stronger. Her grief hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. It wasn't about holding on to the past anymore, but rather about learning to live with it, to carry it in a way that didn't crush her spirit. She spent more time with Daniel, slowly allowing him into her world. They began to build a routine, together, small steps toward healing that didn't require her to forget what had been lost. Daniel, too, found himself changing. The walls he had built around his own heart were beginning to crack. Watching Lily's journey, her fight to reclaim herself from the pain of her past, reminded him of his own struggles. For years he had buried his own trauma, telling himself that success and wealth could heal him. But in truth, he had been just as lost as Lily, just as broken. One afternoon, as the leaves began to turn with the colors of autumn, Daniel took Lily to the park near his estate. They walked along the path, the cool breeze ruffling their hair, the scent of the trees thick in the air. The world around them seemed alive, full of possibility. For the first time in what felt like a long time, Lily smiled as she looked around, the weight of her grief momentarily lifted. "Do you remember the first time you came here?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence between them. Lily looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "I don't think I remember everything clearly, but I think I remember feeling lost. Like I didn't know where I belonged." Daniel nodded, his eyes softening. "I know that feeling. It's hard to find your place when everything around you feels like it's falling apart. But sometimes we have to make our own place in the world. We have to decide who we want to be, not just who we've been told we are." Lily stopped walking, turning to face him. Her eyes were brighter now, not filled with the same heaviness they once carried. "What if I don't know who I'm supposed to be yet?" Daniel crouched down to her level, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to know right now. No one does. You just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And when you're ready, you'll find your way." Lily nodded slowly, as though the weight of his words had settled into her heart. She glanced around the park, her eyes scanning the trees, the sky, the distant horizon. There was a new sense of openness in her, a willingness to embrace the unknown. "What about you?" she asked, her voice soft. "How did you figure out who you were?" Daniel stood up, looking out at the park with her. The years of wealth, success, and solitude seemed distant now, as if they no longer defined him. He had spent so much of his life chasing the wrong things, never stopping to ask himself what truly mattered. "I'm still figuring it out," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But I think I'm finally realizing that it's not about what I've achieved or how many people admire me. It's about the people I help, the lives I touch. And the truth is, I've learned a lot from you, Lily. You've taught me more about strength and resilience than I ever knew." Lily's smile grew wider, a shy but genuine thing, and for the first time, Daniel realized just how much she had already healed, even without realizing it herself. She had grown so much in such a short time, not just in her understanding of the world, but in her understanding of herself. "You're not alone anymore," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a future ahead of you, one that's yours to shape. And no matter what happens, you'll never be alone again. I'll be here. We'll face it together." Lily looked up at him, and for the first time, she didn't just see the man who had saved her from her past. She saw someone who had become a part of her future, someone who was there not because of pity or obligation, but because he believed in her, because he saw the strength within her that she had yet to fully realize. "I'll never forget my dad," she said quietly, her voice steady. "But I don't have to live in the past anymore. I can remember him and still move forward." Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with pride. Exactly. Together they stood there, the warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the trees. There was no more need for words between them. In that moment, they both understood that they had found something greater than safety, something more profound than protection. They had found a family not bound by blood, but by choice. And that Daniel realized was the truest kind of love. The story of Lily and Daniel is not just one of loss and survival. It's a story of resilience, the quiet yet powerful transformation that happens when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable to heal and to find new connections. At its core, this is a tale of redemption, not just for Lily, who is learning to live beyond the pain of her past, but also for Daniel, who is discovering that the real meaning of life doesn't lie in wealth or success, but in the relationships we cultivate and the love we give to others. Lily's journey reflects the way many of us struggle with grief and loss, clinging to memories, because we fear moving forward. But true healing doesn't require us to forget the past. It simply asks us to acknowledge it, to carry it with us in a way that doesn't define us. Lily learns that she doesn't have to live in the shadow of her father's death. She can honor his memory and still move forward, forging her own path. Daniel's role in this transformation is equally significant. His promise to protect and support Lily becomes a mirror for his own healing. Through helping her, he finds himself. In offering Lily the chance to heal, he inadvertently heals his own emotional wounds, learning that compassion, not success, is the key to true fulfillment. This story reminds us that our greatest strength often comes from the connections we form with others. When we choose to stand by someone to offer them our care and support, we not only change their life, we change our own. True healing, as the story illustrates, is a journey, one that can't be rushed, but one that can be shared with those we trust. The lessons here are clear. You don't have to carry your pain alone. Sometimes the only thing that's required to begin healing is for someone to say, "I'm here for you." And when you give someone that gift, you may just find that you're giving it to yourself too.